In my career, I've traveled close to 2 million passenger air miles. Way back when a boss in General Electric told me, you ought to do this for your own information, and because in GE somebody will come along one day and ask you, what have you been doing? So you'll have a record. And in the course of that, I learned which airlines had the best service at the gate and in the airplane at a time when there was service. For instance, this story, which I obviously, when it's over, you'll know why I can never forget it. TWA flying with one stop in between Phoenix and either Boston or New York, and I don't remember which. In those days, you were served a meal on a long flight in TWA, even to the extent of being asked how you wanted your steak cooked. Those were the days when travel was different. In this case, I'm sitting on the right aisle seat, 3 seats across the aisle here, 2 seats here next to me, and I'm probably halfway down the length of the coach cabin, and these, it was lunchtime, and so we were being served first salads with dressing, which, as I remember, it was either in a little cup or had already been put on the lettuce. I can't quite remember that. And as it turned out, it really wasn't important in this instance. But the stewardesses were now known as flight attendants, you understand. They would have 3 of these trays in one hand and 3 in this one. And they would come up, and from behind, the galley was in behind, and they would come up and get so they could see you, and they'd say to you, Barbara, you're by the window, take that one. And then the next person took this one, and then me, I'd take this one, and then they'd go that way. Well, she started over here, or I think. What I do know is that something went wrong, and she reacted, and she still had all 6 trays at that moment, and then they started falling on me. And I literally had 6 salad plates dumped on me. And it was all over in a hurry. And I just sat there, and I looked at myself, dressing lettuce. There was lettuce on my head. My seatmates told me that later. And God, Wes, Mr. Zimmerman, you were a mess. Well, this flight attendant, a lovely young woman, she just came apart. Started to cry, tears running down her cheeks, and I could see the fellow flight attendants coming from the front to help her and so forth. And I knew I was a disaster. But Dad had told me you can only make things worse when you get mad. And that stuck with me. And I reached up and took her hand, and I pulled her down to me, and I said, look, I'm not mad. I'm not going to do anything. This was an accident. It can all be fixed. Now get a hold of yourself, wipe your eyes, and do the professional thing, and pick it up, and then you can bring me and all of us our salads. And she took that, and one of the other flight attendants heard it, definitely. I learned that later. And they fixed me up, and of course, helped me get picked up and so forth. They did what they could, let me do what I could in the men's restroom. And then at the stopover, they got my bag out. They took me to a room where I could really clean myself and get totally redressed and everything. And they took all the dirty clothes, stuffed them in a bag, and they said, you'll get them in Boston or wherever we were going. And they cleaned everything, and everything worked fine. And I didn't feel that bad about it. In fact, I often laughed about it. I came home and told my family I had 6 salads dumped on me, complete with dressing, you know. But the point is, this was very interesting because I flew with TWA all the time. I was at the top of their mileage brackets, you know. And it never occurred to me, but I discovered pretty quickly on future trips that wherever I was going and whenever I made a reservation, it came up on their computer system flagged. And I was known as the man who'd had the salads put on. It was also known that I liked champagne, and in Coach then days, you could buy a quarter bottle, I guess it was, yeah, of champagne, just Taylor's. It wasn't fancy, but it was cheap, and it was something. And that led to all sorts of special things. And the idea was that I didn't get mad. I knew it could be fixed. Granted, one plate had landed on my head, it was a little sore, but that was fine. So the first thing is, do the same the next time some idiotic thing happens to you. And then secondly, ask yourself, who was doing the customer care? Who was doing the customer care? I learned later that that young lady, it was her second week on the job after leaving flight attendant school. The interesting thing to me always has been that the guy next to me never got a drop on him. And everybody wondered, how did I manage to get it all? Well, I'm in a dress suit, you see. That's the way we flew then. Great experience, a lesson in customer care. Enough said.
Salad man.
So did you ever hear what happened to the stewardess?
Oh, I wrote her a letter. I got her card, specifically asked for it. And I sent her a letter and thanked her for reacting as she had. And she thanked me. She said, "You saved me." And by the time she stood up, she'd wiped her eyes and she looked. And she was just saying the right things. "I'm sorry, we'll take care of you," and so forth. Because they still had to feed that plane full of people. But it worked. It comes back to what you've read in the New Testament. You reap what you sow, which means you harvest what you plant, which means if you're a knothead and get mad, you're going to harvest a lot of angry people. And if you're not, and if you take this in stride and with a smile, it ends up helping everyone. And it made my travels with TWA thereafter much nicer, though I certainly didn't plan it that way. And for me, it was a way of helping someone, it turned out.
Well, today, people would rant and rave and make sure that person gets fired, and then you got arrested by the TSA, but it's...
To what purpose?
Exactly.
To
What good does it do? Right.
But I'll never forget that, for obvious reasons.
What?
I mean, you can't forget that kind of an experience. But I can still see her face. And this, oh my God, and she started to cry.